The Iran issue is genuinely occupying a significant portion of our agenda these days. The region simply cannot endure another new war breaking out there. Our president is also demonstrating the utmost sensitivity regarding this matter. Therefore, we intend to utilize every possible means to prevent a potential war. So what's important for us is that as these discussions are moving towards a certain concrete and tangible result, we don't gradually distance ourselves from the looming threat of war, you see. Currently, at least, there doesn't seem to be any immediate threat of war. In Iran, I mean, I don't want to elaborate on specific scenarios, but an airstrike or anything else won't change the regime. We don't want to see dramatic changes that would alter the existing balance. I mean, there is a balance of power, and its disruption would seriously undermine the spirit of cooperation in the region. Secondly, some countries like Iran, who interpret this situation differently and have other problems, nuclear weapons, it makes them try to become its owner. It will drag us in, and we too might involuntarily have to participate in the same race. Just 12 days before that, during the June war, one night we received a phone call from Marco Rubio. He said, tell the Iranians that within the next few hours, absolutely anything could happen.
Right.
Yes.
So Iran is making such preparations. America is also making preparations.
When I spoke with my Iranian colleague that very night, he was utterly astonished, asking, yeah, how on earth could such a thing possibly happen? And he explained we had already given the appointment date for Sunday, specifically to meet in Oman. Of course, the crucial point here is that this time the ones who were actually meeting were Americans, but the ones who carried out the strike were Israelis.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has delivered one of the most pointed warnings yet about the direction of nuclear negotiations between the United States and Iran. In an interview published Thursday by the Financial Times, Fidan said both Washington and Tehran are showing signs of flexibility, but cautioned that broadening the scope of talks beyond the nuclear file could, in his words, risk triggering another war in the region. According to Reuters, Fidan told the Financial Times that it is positive that the Americans appear willing to tolerate Iranian enrichment within clearly set boundaries. He added that the Iranians now recognize they need to reach a deal with the Americans, and the Americans understand that the Iranians have certain limits, calling it pointless to try to force them beyond those limits. Fidan's remarks built on a broader case he laid out earlier in a live interview with CNN Turk on February 9th. During that broadcast, according to Anadolu Agency reporting on a CNN Turk interview, Fidan said in his own words that he doubted airstrikes alone would topple Iran's government, calling the notion a pipe dream. He acknowledged that military action could weaken the state and its ability to provide services, but argued that as a political entity, the regime would continue to function. His assessment directly challenged a line of thinking that has circulated in Washington and Tel Aviv, where some analysts and officials have suggested that sustained military pressure could lead to regime collapse. Fidan's response, according to TRT World, was unequivocal. The regime does not change through an airstrike or anything else, he said. Perhaps the most consequential moment of the CNN Turk interview came when Fidan addressed the possibility of Iran acquiring nuclear weapons. According to the Jerusalem Post and the FDD's Long War Journal, Fidan made remarks that analysts cited by FDD's Long War Journal interpreted as concern over regional nuclear competition if Iran pursued weapons. Fidan said Iranian nuclearization would upset the balance of power in the Middle East and could initiate a regional arms race, though this reflected his personal assessment rather than a confirmed shift in Ankara's policy. He said Turkey does not want to see dramatic changes that would alter the existing regional balance, and that such a development would seriously damage the spirit of cooperation. In a moment that drew significant attention, according to multiple outlets, including the National and Turkish Minute, host Ahmet Hakan asked Fidan directly whether Turkey should possess nuclear weapons. Fidan remained silent, declining to answer even when offered the option of saying no comment. Analysts have interpreted the silence as a form of strategic ambiguity designed to preserve deterrence without committing to a formal policy shift. The context is not theoretical. Turkey is a signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and a NATO member, but its first nuclear power plant, the Russian-built Akuyu facility on the Mediterranean coast, is expected to begin operations this year. According to the FDD's Long War Journal, Turkey sits on 9,000 tons of uranium and 380,000 tons of thorium, a resource that could theoretically support a weapons program. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stated in 2019 that he did not accept the notion that some countries could possess nuclear weapons while others, including Turkey, could not. Until now, that rhetoric has not been matched by concrete weapons development, but Fidan's silence on the question suggests Ankara is keeping its options deliberately open. Fidan also offered a rare behind-the-scenes account of the hours leading up to the June 2025 escalation, though this account has not been independently confirmed. According to Iran International's summary of Fidan's CNN Turk comments, Fidan said that during the 12-day conflict, Turkey received a phone call from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who told them to relay to the Iranians that within the next few hours, absolutely anything could happen. Fidan said he then spoke with his Iranian counterpart, who was, in Fidan's words, utterly astonished, asking how such a thing could possibly happen. The Iranian side, according to Fidan, explained that they had already set an appointment to meet in Oman for talks. Fidan drew a distinction between the June escalation and the current moment, noting that in June it was the United States that was talking and Israel that was striking. He suggested this time the situation may be different and said Turkey is doing everything it can to prevent a disaster. According to Israel Hayam, citing the Financial Times interview, Turkey had made clear to Washington that an all-or-nothing approach toward Iran will not yield results. Fidan reportedly recommended the Americans focus first on the nuclear issue and not demand Tehran address 4 issues simultaneously, including the missile program, support for armed groups, treatment of protesters, and the nuclear file. The warning echoed a concern expressed by multiple regional diplomats who, according to Al Jazeera, have argued that bundling demands risks overloading a negotiation that is already fragile. According to Fidan, Iran is prepared to discuss only 2 issues: the nature of uranium enrichment and what will be done with uranium enriched to 60%. Fidan added that he believes Tehran genuinely wants to reach a real agreement and would accept limits on enrichment levels and a strict oversight regime in terms he compared to the framework of the 2015 nuclear deal. He pointed to the fatwa issued by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei declaring nuclear weapons forbidden, according to the FDD's Long War Journal, as evidence that the nuclear program's direction is not irreversible. TRT World reported that Fidan said regional powers, including Turkey, are working on what he called creative ideas to address broader security concerns without collapsing the nuclear track. Fidan also told the Financial Times that he had proposed a different negotiating format altogether, recommending direct face-to-face talks rather than the indirect shuttle diplomacy through mediators that characterized the February 7th session. The diplomatic backdrop to Fidan's comments is the resumption of U.S.-Iran talks in Muscat, Oman on February 7th. According to NPR, reports described indirect talks as having resumed recently in Muscat, a constructive first step after the disruption caused by the June 2025 conflict, which had halted 5 earlier rounds of talks held in Rome and Muscat. The talks came after weeks of escalating tension fueled by massive protests that swept Iran beginning in late December 2025, triggered by the collapse of the Iranian currency and worsening economic conditions, according to ABC News. Those protests quickly took on a political character, with crowds openly calling for regime change. Iranian authorities responded with what observers described as a brutal crackdown. The U.S.-based human rights activist news agency, according to Radio Free Europe, reported a confirmed death toll of over 6,800, with the number of fatalities still under investigation reaching more than 11,000 and over 50,000 people arrested. For the first time at such talks, the American side included U.S. Navy Admiral Brad Cooper, the head of Central Command, whose presence in dress uniform at the Muscat negotiations served as a reminder that the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and other warships were positioned off the coast of Iran in the Arabian Sea. The U.S. delegation was led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, according to the White House. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei, speaking at a news conference on February 11th, according to AP, described the Muscat meeting as a half-day session focused primarily on generalities. He said Iran's principles are clear and that its demand is to secure the interests of the Iranian nation based on international norms and the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, speaking to Al Jazeera after the February 7th session, described the talks as a good start, but insisted there is a long way to go to build trust. He said Iran enters diplomacy with open eyes and a steady memory of the past year, and that equal standing, mutual respect, and mutual interest are not rhetoric, but the pillars of a durable agreement. According to Al Jazeera, Araghchi said nuclear enrichment is Iran's inalienable right and must continue, adding that Iran is ready to reach a reassuring agreement on enrichment. He made clear, however, that Iran's missile program was never negotiable during the Oman session and warned that Tehran would target U.S. military bases in the Middle East if the United States attacks Iranian territory. Araghchi also noted, according to NPR, that during the session an opportunity arose to shake hands with the American delegation, a rare occurrence given the decades of hostility between the two countries. He called on Washington to refrain from threats and pressure so the talks could continue, saying that the prerequisite for any dialogue is refraining from coercion. Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi, who oversaw the session, described the talks as useful for clarifying both Iranian and American thinking, though he framed them as a means of finding the foundations for the resumption of negotiations rather than a step toward reaching a deal. In the days following the Oman session, according to AP, Ali Larijani, the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, traveled to Muscat on February 10th. He met with Omani Sultan Haitham bin Tariq for nearly 3 hours and with Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi, according to Fox News citing Iranian state media IRNA. Photos from the meeting showed what appeared to be a letter sheathed in plastic alongside the Omani host, suggesting Larijani was carrying a formal communication. According to Axios, Larijani then traveled to Qatar, which houses the U.S. military installation involved in the June 2025 strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. U.S. officials told Axios that Larijani may have shared a message intended for Washington through intermediaries. Before departing, according to Fox News, Larijani accused Israel of playing a destructive role in the talks, warning that Netanyahu was heading to Washington with the intent to, in his words, teach Americans the framework of nuclear negotiations. Against this diplomatic activity, the United States maintained its posture of coercive leverage. Vice President J.D. Vance, speaking to reporters before boarding Air Force Two in Baku, Azerbaijan on February 11th, according to Fox News, warned that there is another option on the table if a nuclear deal cannot be reached. Vance said the president has told his entire senior team that they should be trying to cut a deal that ensures the Iranians do not have a nuclear weapon. But, he added, if they cannot cut that deal, then there is another option on the table. When asked whether the U.S. wants to see regime change in Iran, Vance, according to the Times of Israel, responded that if the Iranian people want to overthrow the regime, that is up to the Iranian people. The remark represented a notable shift from weeks earlier when Trump had called on Iranian protesters to take over government institutions and, according to the Wall Street Journal, had asked aides for strike plans that could weaken the regime. Vance's more restrained framing suggested that Washington was recalibrating its public messaging as talks resumed, pulling back from the appearance of pursuing regime change while keeping military options explicitly on the table. President Trump, in a phone interview with Axios published February 10th, said Tehran very much wants to reach a deal, but warned that either they make a deal or Washington will have to do something very tough, like last time. According to the Wall Street Journal, citing 3 U.S. officials, the Pentagon had ordered a second carrier group to prepare for potential deployment, though no formal order had been issued. The USS George H.W. Bush, which had been conducting training exercises off the Virginia coast, was identified as the likely vessel with a deployment timeline of roughly 2 weeks if authorized. Trump told Axios he was considering sending a second carrier, describing the existing force as an armada and suggesting another one might be going. On the ground, Iran has been taking visible steps to protect its nuclear infrastructure. According to the Institute for Science and International Security, high-resolution satellite imagery taken on February 9th showed that Iran had covered all 3 tunnel entrances at the Isfahan nuclear complex with soil. The middle and southern entrances were described as unrecognizable and fully covered, while the northernmost entrance had also been backfilled. The institute assessed that Iran is seriously concerned about a U.S. or Israeli aerial attack or raid, and that backfilling the tunnels would dampen the effects of airstrikes and complicate any ground operation aimed at seizing or destroying materials stored inside. According to last available IAEA reports, Iran maintains a significant enriched uranium stockpile, with the agency noting that a fraction has been enriched to 60% purity. The exact composition and status of materials at Isfahan remain under review, as the IAEA has been unable to fully assess Iran's program for months, raising non-proliferation concerns among analysts and officials. According to the New York Times, analysts noted that similar preparations were observed in the days before Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025, when U.S. warplanes struck the facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. And the fortification at Isfahan is part of a broader pattern documented by satellite analysts. According to the New York Times, Iran has carried out construction work at more than half of the roughly 24 locations struck by the U.S. or Israel during the June war. The report found that missile facilities had been repaired faster than nuclear sites, which experts said reflects Iran's prioritization of retaliatory capability. At Isfahan, barriers had been installed near an entrance to a complex less than a mile from the main facility, raising questions, according to the Times, about the possibility of a previously undisclosed enrichment site. At a new underground site close to Natanz, tunnel entrances had also been reinforced. The Times also reported that at the Parchin military complex, where Iran has tested high explosives that can be used as triggers for nuclear warheads, a new 150-foot-long chamber had been constructed. That site was not struck in June, but was targeted by Israel in 2024 and has since been fortified with anti-aircraft artillery, according to ISIS. The question of enrichment remains the most consequential divide. The history of U.S. messaging on this point has been inconsistent. During the 2025 negotiation rounds, according to PBS, U.S. envoy Witkoff at one point suggested during a Fox News appearance that 3.67% enrichment could be something the countries could agree on, the same cap set by the 2015 nuclear deal from which Trump withdrew in 2018. The remark drew criticism from hawks who noted it closely resembled the Obama-era JCPOA framework. The Times of Israel reported that Witkoff then reversed himself the following day, stating that Iran must stop and eliminate its nuclear enrichment and weaponization program. Phil Gordon, former national security advisor to Kamala Harris, according to Haaretz, called the shift as incoherent as tariff policy. That inconsistency has carried into the current round. According to Fidan's Financial Times interview, Washington now appears willing to tolerate limited enrichment within defined boundaries, but the White House has not publicly confirmed this position. Iran, for its part, according to Al Jazeera, has rejected U.S. calls to halt enrichment entirely. Araghchi told Al Jazeera that Iran is willing to discuss the level and purity of enrichment, but that the right to enrich under the NPT is non-negotiable. The diplomatic picture was further complicated by the Trump-Netanyahu meeting at the White House on February 11th. According to AP, the nearly 3-hour session was held behind closed doors with no joint press conference, no photo opportunity, and no formal statement. Roll Call described the format as a striking departure from previous visits, noting it was the third time a major leader had met Trump without press access since the beginning of the year. It was Netanyahu's 7th visit to meet Trump since the president returned to office in January 2025, according to Israeli media, a frequency that reflects the centrality of the Iran file to the bilateral relationship. Before departing Israel, Netanyahu told reporters he would present the president with what he called essential principles for negotiations, principles he described as important not only to Israel, but to anyone who desires peace and security in the Middle East. According to Ynet, Netanyahu told Trump that Iran's missile program and its support for armed groups must be included in any agreement, and presented information claiming that Iran continues to execute civilians despite pledges to halt such actions. Independent confirmation of those specific claims was not immediately available. According to Reuters, Israel has expressed concern that Washington could pursue a limited nuclear deal that excludes missile and proxy constraints, a framework that Tel Aviv views as insufficient and one that could effectively tie Israel's hands while a U.S.-Iran agreement is in place. And the broader region has responded with its own diplomatic pressure. According to Axios, at least 9 Middle Eastern countries have contacted the White House at the highest levels, urging the administration not to abandon diplomacy. Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Qatar have been among the most active, lobbying to dissuade military strikes. The Middle East Institute has assessed that U.S. bases across the region are among the most vulnerable Iranian targets, with more than 30 installations within range of Iranian missiles. Gulf states, according to the same analysis, are anxious that a military confrontation would destabilize the broader region and potentially draw them into a conflict they did not choose. Iran has reportedly warned several countries that U.S. bases would be targeted in the event of an American strike, adding another layer of deterrence calculation. Shortly after the February 7th Oman talks concluded, according to the Times of Israel, the U.S. announced new sanctions against shipping entities and vessels aimed at curbing Iran's oil exports, targeting 14 vessels as part of what the State Department called the administration's maximum pressure campaign. It was unclear whether the timing was linked to the talks, but the move underscored the dual-track approach of diplomacy paired with economic coercion. Fidan's warnings carry particular weight because of Turkey's unique positioning. According to Anadolu Agency, Fidan revealed that nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran had originally been proposed to take place in Istanbul, but were moved to Oman at Iran's request. Turkey had proposed a different format, with Fidan saying Ankara recommended face-to-face meetings between Iranian and American officials rather than indirect talks through a mediator. Turkey's role as an intermediary has been reinforced by Fidan's direct contact with both Araghchi and the American side. According to The National, Turkey, alongside Gulf countries, has been involved in round-the-clock conversations with American and Iranian leaders aimed at averting a new war. Fidan met Araghchi in Istanbul on January 30th, according to Reuters, in what appears to have been part of a broader effort to lay groundwork before the Oman session. The situation as of mid-February 2026 presents a paradox visible from every angle. On one side, according to multiple reports, both Washington and Tehran have expressed willingness to continue talking, with Araghchi calling the Oman session a good start and Trump describing it as very good. On the other, the USS Abraham Lincoln remains in the CENTCOM area of operations. A second carrier group is being prepared, and satellite imagery analysts report protective measures at Iranian nuclear sites, though independent confirmation of the full scope and intent remains limited. Turkey has positioned itself as the voice arguing for restraint, with Fidan explicitly warning that the diplomatic window is narrow and that overloading it with demands beyond the nuclear file could close it entirely. Israel, by contrast, is pressing for a broader framework that addresses missiles and proxies, a position that aligns with its long-standing assessment that a nuclear-only deal leaves the most dangerous threats unaddressed. Iran insists the nuclear file must be resolved first and separately, and has signaled through both diplomatic channels and physical fortifications that it is preparing for either outcome. Fidan's message, delivered from the vantage point of a NATO ally that shares a border with Iran, is that the path to stability runs through the nuclear file alone. If every issue is sought to be resolved simultaneously, he told the Financial Times, according to TRT World, this could ignite the fuse of another war. Whether that warning is heeded in Washington, Tehran, or Tel Aviv may determine the trajectory of the coming weeks. Subscribe to WLA for daily coverage of the forces reshaping the Middle East.